They say history forgets the battles that don't change empires. But sometimes, the forgotten ones are the most terrifying. Imagine this: a foggy October morning in 1068. 3 princes of Kievan Rus ride into a river valley they believe they control. Behind them, rows of heavily armed warriors move with confidence. And yet, less than an hour later, this same army will collapse in panic, drown in the river Alta, and vanish into chaos. Today, we are diving into the Battle of the Alta River, a battle you've probably never heard of, but one that shaped the future of Eastern Europe far more than anyone admits. This is a story of arrogance, betrayal, fear, and the brutal rise of a power that would soon dominate the steppe, the Polovshans. And it begins with a single mistake: underestimating an enemy who knew the land better, rode faster, and killed without hesitation. The year is 1068. Kievan Rus is supposed to be strong, supposed to be united, supposed to be the shield of Europe against the nomadic world beyond the horizon. But the truth is uglier. Internal rivalries are eating the state from the inside out. 2 decades earlier, the Pechenegs terrorized the southern borders. Now, a new force rides out of the endless grasslands: the Cumans, the Polovshans, the golden warriors of the steppe. They don't come in peace. They come with speed, skill, and a strategy no Slavic prince has ever faced before. And as their raids burn deeper into the heartlands, panic spreads among the people. Something must be done. Someone must fight them. And that someone becomes 3 men, 3 brothers, 3 princes trying to act like one army. Sviatoslav, Vivalad, Izyaslav, sons of the great Uaslav the Wise, princes of Kiev, Chernihiv, and Pereyaslav. Together, they command thousands. Together, they should have been unstoppable. But together, they will make catastrophic decisions. And the first one is believing the enemy is too weak to fight openly. The second is marching out without preparation. And the third, the one that costs them everything, is trusting that the Cumans will fight like Europeans. They won't. As the Rus army marches toward the Alta, they expect a small raid, a scattered group fleeing back to the steppe. But the Polovshans have gathered a full host, not to defend, but to lure. They watch the Rus advance from behind hills and riverbanks, their bows ready, their horses restless, their scouts already circling like wolves. The plan is simple: provoke, encircle, break, destroy. No heroic duels. No noble formations. Just precision, patience, and cold-blooded efficiency. When the Rus arrive, they don't even realize they've stepped into a killing field. The river is behind them. The plains stretch ahead. And the Cumans are already closing in. But the princes don't see the danger. Not yet. They believe they have the advantage. They believe they can force a decisive battle. They believe glory is waiting for them. What's actually waiting is humiliation so deep that within days, the people of Kiev will rebel, burn the prince's palace, and install a new ruler. But all of that comes later. First comes the moment every soldier remembers: the silence before disaster. The wind dies. The horses snort. A strange tension spreads across the Rus lines. Something feels wrong. Too quiet. Too still. Too empty. And then, from the horizon, movement. A cloud of dust. Dozens of silhouettes. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Fast. Fluid. Relentless. The Cumans appear like a storm breaking out of thin air. Their arrows are already narked. Their horses barely touch the ground. And in seconds, the battlefield erupts. The first wave of arrows slams into the Rus lines with terrifying accuracy. Shields rise instinctively. Horses scream. Men duck. Confusion spreads. The Polovshan cavalry doesn't charge. They circle. They fire. They vanish. Then reappear from another direction. For the princes, it's the worst kind of battle, one they cannot control. Their formation wavers. Their archers struggle to respond. Their infantry is too slow. The steppe riders strike again and again, never stopping, never giving the Rus a chance to regroup. Sviatoslav orders a counterattack, leading his druzhina forward. It's brave. It's bold. It's useless. The Cumans scatter instantly, drawing the prince deeper into the trap. Behind him, the Rus center begins to crumble. Men are yelling. Horses are stumbling into each other. The neat lines dissolve into knots of panic. And the Cumans, like predators sensing weakness, tighten the circle. Every moment, more arrows rain down. Every moment, the encirclement grows. Every moment, the The Rus army edges closer to the river behind them, the only escape and the deadliest one. This is the beginning of the collapse. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just fear spreading faster than orders can. And still, the princes don't retreat. Not yet. They refuse to believe the battle is lost. They refuse to accept that the enemy has outplayed them. But history doesn't care about pride. It only cares about consequences. And the consequence of this miscalculation is disaster. Because within minutes, the Polovshans will make their final move. A move that will turn a struggling battle into a complete rout. A move the Rus princes will never forget. And a move that will change the fate of Kiev forever. But that part of the story comes next. Because as the Rus princes struggle to understand what's happening, the Polovshans are already shifting into the final phase of their plan. They don't rush. They don't roar. They don't need the theatrics of a European cavalry charge. Their power lies in rhythm. Hit, fade, hit again. Their arrows fall in waves, each one measuring the panic spreading through the Rus ranks. At first, the princes still believe they can restore order. Izyaslav rides along the line shouting commands, but his voice is swallowed by chaos. Vivalard tries to reposition the archers, but they're firing into empty air. The Cumans never stay where they're supposed to be. Sviatoslav, the strongest warrior of the three, is still fighting forward, determined to break the ring before it fully closes. But even he feels it, the pressure tightening, the circle shrinking, the land itself turning against them. The Rus warriors are brave. No one doubts that. But bravery doesn't stop a strategy designed to turn structure into confusion. They came expecting a straightforward fight. They found a shifting battlefield where the enemy dictates every moment. Then it happens, the subtle, deadly movement that ends any chance of recovery. The Cumans stop circling. They line up. One long, curved formation stretching across the plain like a bowstring pulled tight. Their scouts cut off the flanks. Their fastest riders swing behind the Rus lines, blocking the path toward the forest. And suddenly, the princes realize the truth. There is no way forward. No way sideways. Only the river. The Alta, cold, deep in parts, shallow in others, now becomes both lifeline and trap. A single misstep and the entire army becomes pinned between water and arrows. And that is exactly what the Polovshans want. The final assault begins not with a shout, but with acceleration. Thousands of hooves strike the earth at the same moment, sending vibrations like thunder across the valley. Dust rises. Boughs pull back. And the Rus formation, already cracked, begins to break for real. The left flank is the first to collapse. A volley of arrows hits them at close distance. Shields tilt. Horses rear. Panic ripples outward. What starts as a small opening widens instantly into a gap wide enough for the Cumans to pour through. The Rus infantry turns, tries to close the breach, but they are too slow, too heavy, too disorganized. The princes see it. They shout for the men to hold. They raise their banners. But the battlefield no longer listens to leadership. It listens to fear. And fear always moves faster than orders. Suddenly, the retreat begins, not officially, not commanded, but instinctively. Men step back. Then they turn. Then they run. Not because they're cowards, but because every direction except the river is filled with moving shadows on horseback. The Cumans seize the moment. But they do not chase recklessly. They press just enough to keep the Rus running, not enough to let them regroup. Every few seconds, another volley arcs overhead. Every few seconds, another part of the formation fractures. The princes try to rally their troops one last time. Izyaslav raises his spear, calling for a defensive line near the riverbank. Vivalard attempts to gather the archers to cover the retreat. Sviatoslav pushes forward, hoping to create a path out of the trap. But each one of them is fighting a different battle, because the army no longer exists as an army. It's become a crowd. A desperate, frightened, exhausted crowd pushing backward toward the water. And the Cumans tighten the noose. From the hills, new riders appear, fresh, rested, untouched by the first hour of battle. They sweep down the slopes like a second storm, hitting the Rus flanks with precision. The psychological effect is immediate. The soldiers believe reinforcements have arrived for the enemy. They don't know these riders were hidden on purpose. They don't know the entire battlefield has been a trap from the beginning. All they know is that they must reach the river. The Alta churns with the first wave of warriors splashing into it, some trying to cross, others simply trying to escape the arrows. The bank turns into a bottleneck. Horses stumble in the mud. Men slip. Shields fall into the current. Once proud warriors who marched in perfect formation that morning now push and shove just to stay ahead of the next volley. The princes are forced to make a decision no leader ever wants to make: fight and die together, or retreat separately and survive to fight again. Survival wins. Izyaslav, realizing the capital will fall without him, turns his horse and escapes with his closest retainers. Vivalard, surrounded and nearly cut off, manages to break through a weak point in the Cuman lines. Sviatoslav, furious, refusing to admit defeat, tries to cover the retreat one last time before being pulled away by his Druzhina. Behind them, the Cumans do not chase the princes directly. They don't need to. The victory is already complete. By the time the sun sets, the field near the Alta is silent. The dust settles. The river flows calmly again. The Polovshans gather their spoils, their prisoners, their horses. They don't celebrate loudly. They don't have to. Their message to the world is already clear. Kievan Rus is not invincible. And the steppe power has risen. What happens next is even more shocking than the defeat itself. Because when the surviving warriors return to Kiev and tell the people what happened, the city does something no one expects, something unheard of in its history. It rises against its own prince. But that is another chapter. A chapter of rebellion, rage, humiliation, and fire. A chapter that transforms a battlefield defeat into a political earthquake. And it begins the moment the survivors enter the Golden Gate of Kiev. The survivors of the Alta River stumble into Kiev like ghosts. Dust coats their armor, their banners hang limp, and the air smells of sweat, mud, and terror. They carry no victory, no tales of glory, only stories of death, chaos, and failure. And the people, watching them return, sense it immediately. This is not the triumphant army they were promised. This is an army broken, humiliated, defeated by shadows on the steppe. Word spreads faster than any messenger. From the marketplace to the Golden Gate, whispers swell into cries. Our princes have failed. Our sons are dead. The Alta is a grave, and they led us there. Kiev, a city accustomed to order, law, and the pride of Yugoslav's legacy, begins to tremble. The ruling princes had promised protection, unity, and strength. Instead, they brought fear. The first riots ignite almost instantly. Commoners armed with whatever they can grab, sticks, knives, farming tools, storm the prince's palace. Nobles, unsure where their loyalties should lie, either hide behind gates or join the crowd, swayed by outrage. Smoke rises from the kitchens, torches light the streets, and the clamor of rebellion drowns out any attempt at diplomacy. The city itself feels alive with anger, a pulse of rage no soldier can fight. Inside the palace, Izyaslav, Vivalard, and Sviatoslav gather their advisors. They try to speak, to explain, to rally. But their words are drowned in a tide of screams. And the reality hits them hard. Defeat on the battlefield has consequences far beyond the riverbanks. It has undermined their authority. Their people no longer trust them. Kiev is no longer a city. They realize it is a volcano ready to erupt. Outside, the mob reaches the gates. Stones fly. Doors splinter. Archers attempt to defend the walls, but the chaos is too great, the anger too personal. Each shout carries blame, accusation, and the simple truth: the Alta River massacre cannot be undone. The princes are trapped by the very people they were meant to protect. And in that moment, they understand the bitter irony of command. Survival on the battlefield matters less than survival in the hearts of your people. By nightfall, the palace is overrun. Fires flicker along the streets, casting long shadows on the faces of the angry citizens. The princes are forced to flee once more, not from Cumans, not from arrows, but from their own city. Kiev, which should have been their bastion, has become another battlefield, and this one is more personal, more immediate, and far more dangerous. In the aftermath, the political landscape of Kievan Rus changes irrevocably. Power shifts hands, alliances crumble, and a new order emerges, one that will shape the politics, warfare, and diplomacy of Eastern Europe for decades. The Alta River is no longer just a place of military defeat. It becomes a symbol, a warning, a lesson engraved into the memory of a nation. The steppe is not a distant threat to be underestimated. Pride is a fragile shield. And unity is everything. The princes eventually regroup, far from Kiev, their forces reduced to fragments. They must contend with not only the Cumans waiting beyond the steppe, but also the very people they once ruled. Rebuilding trust, rebuilding armies, and rebuilding cities becomes a more dangerous battle than anything fought on the plains. And though the Alta River may fade from the history books, its lessons are etched into the bones of the Rus people forever. Because history has a cruel way of remembering, not the battles that built empires, but the ones that taught them humility. And the Battle of the Alta River was a lesson paid in blood, terror, and exile. The ground trembled long before anyone saw the enemy. At first, the men on the wooden walls near Khmelnyk mistook it for distant thunder, a storm dragging itself over the empty plains of Podolia, but the sky was clear. No clouds, no wind, only a pale, dying sun hanging over frozen earth. Then the sound grew heavier, deeper, more deliberate, until it could no longer be mistaken for weather. Hooves. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. A low, relentless roar rolled over the hills, swallowing the silence. On the horizon, the land turned black as if a shadow had broken loose from the earth and was moving by its own will. Banners cut the sky like blades. Beneath them flowed an ocean of riders. No drums, no war cries, only the terrible discipline of the Mongol advance. Someone whispered, "They have arrived." Not raiders, not bandits. This was the storm that erased cities, the force that had already turned Kiev to ash. And now it stood before the last fragile barrier on the road west. By March of 1241, the name of Batu Khan had reached every corner of Europe. From scorched monasteries to terrified royal courts, from burned villages to stunned capitals, the same stories travelled faster than any army. Cities swallowed in days, armies erased in hours, rivers thick with bodies. Yet belief came slowly. Kings debated. Priests prayed. Knights polished their armor and spoke of honor while fear crept across the land like a sickness. Khmelnyk was not a great capital, not a legendary stronghold. It was a crossing, a heartbeat before the Carpathians, an unassuming point on the map where roads converged and hope made its last stand. Here, local Rus forces gathered. Hungarian detachments joined them, grim and silent. A few Polish nobles arrived, driven less by loyalty than by terror of what followed if the line broke. They spoke different languages beneath different banners, but fear, at least, needed no translation. They all faced one truth: if Khmelnyk fell, the road to Europe lay open. Across the field, the Mongol army did not pause to impress or intimidate. It did not form ranks in neat, chivalric lines. It did not announce itself with the pageantry of medieval war. It unfolded. From the northern hills, one wing slid downward like a dark tide. From the southern forests, another force emerged in perfect timing. In the center, the front line advanced at a measured pace, bows already in hand, as if the battle's ending had been written long before the first arrow was released. Each rider was part of a system refined by endless conquest. Composite bows curved like claws, capable of punching through armor at ranges European archers could barely imagine. Sabers flashed like slivers of moonlight. Lances lowered in controlled, mechanical motion. And above all hovered the invisible presence of minds that thought of war as geometry, Batu's iron will and Sube'etei's cold mathematical genius moving men across the landscape as though they were pieces on a living board. The first clash came not from the Mongols, but from Europe. A group of armored knights, bright crests, raised lances, iron hooves striking the ground with thunder, charged forward in a desperate display of courage. They were the old world made flesh, faith in steel, in mass, in the unstoppable momentum of a mounted charge. They lowered their visors, offered hurried prayers, and rode straight toward the dark line ahead. The Mongols did not meet them. The formation simply opened, creating an unnatural corridor in the center of the field, a gap that made no sense on a battlefield. The knights surged into it, believing the enemy had fractured. For a brief heartbeat, they thought they had broken the line of the invincible horde. Then the sky turned lethal. Arrows fell from both flanks, from concealed positions, from angles that defied expectation. Horses screamed as shafts tore into them. Men toppled, smashed inside their armor, impaled before their swords ever touched an enemy. The narrow passage became a corridor of death. As the surviving knights tried to turn back, Mongol riders slipped in behind them, sealing the exit. Metal rang on frozen ground. Blood fanned across the pale earth in dark patterns. In less than 10 minutes, the charge, the pride of Europe, was dissolved into corpses and scattered iron. They had not even reached the enemy. There had never been an enemy line to reach. Only space, carefully shaped for slaughter. On the Rus side, confusion spread like fire driven by wind. Commanders shouted for discipline, for formation, for archers to ready their strings. But terror speaks louder than orders. Men had seen what happened to the knights. They had seen arrows pierce steel and horses collapse mid-gallop. The certainty of defeat wormed its way into their minds. Some tightened their grips on spears. Others stared into the approaching mass as if already hypnotized by the end. Above them, a dark cloud formed again. Not rain, but arrows. Shields lifted in a fractured wave. Some cracked. Some men crumpled behind them. Others ran without knowing where they were going. With every second, every step backward, the line that was meant to hold the West began to tear itself apart. This was the moment the Mongols waited for. Not strength. Not bravery. Weakness. A gap on the left. A hesitation on the right. A unit moving when it should have stood still. Sube'etei saw them all, and a single subtle signal rippled through the ranks. The encirclement began. From every side, the Mongol cavalry surged inward, a tightening ring around the confused and shrinking European force. Horse archers rode in disciplined circles, firing without pause, transforming the ground into a killing field. Attempts to break through met walls of moving riders and curved blades. Every escape was answered by another wave, another line already waiting. The field became a prison of mud and blood. Screams blended into one long, shattered sound. Khmelnyk was no longer a battlefield. It was a pit opening under the weight of history. And still, in the heart of the chaos, individuals fought with a fury born of knowing there would be no tomorrow. A Rus warrior with a splintered spear used it like a club until arrows bristled from his shield like thorns. A Hungarian knight, crushed beneath his dying horse, reloaded a crossbow again and again until steel finally cut the movement from his hands. A boy who should have been anywhere else in the world held a torn banner up to the sky even when there was no one left to follow it. They did not change the end. But for a fleeting moment, they reminded the earth that men can resist even the impossible. From a distant rise, Batu Khan watched without expression as the trap closed and the last serious resistance folded in on itself. He did not shout orders. He did not celebrate. To him, this was confirmation, not conquest. Another gate had opened. Another path had been cleared. The army of the steppe did what it was built to do, and then it moved on. By evening, the noise faded. The hooves passed on. The arrows stopped falling. A strange, heavy silence settled over the land, broken only by the crackle of small fires and the low, fading moans of the wounded. The Mongol riders moved among the fallen like shadows, finishing what time itself had already decided. As the sun disappeared behind the western hills, the earth around Khmelnyk was no longer simply ground. It was a new page in history, written not in ink, but in blood. No songs would be sung about this place. No great monuments would rise. The world would not remember the name. Yet this was the moment the old Europe truly shattered. Because after Khmelnyk, there was nothing left between the storm and the heart of a continent. Only cities that did not yet know they were already dead. The night that followed the Battle of Khmelnyk was colder than any living man had known. The survivors huddled among the bodies of comrades and enemies alike, the fires they had lit to keep the darkness at bay casting trembling shadows over a field soaked in blood and mud. The wind carried the stench of death across the plains, and in that chill, even the hardiest warriors felt a seed of despair take root. Rumors spread quickly, whispered from one trembling soldier to another. The Mongols were everywhere, watching, waiting, their eyes as sharp as the arrows they fired. The local peasants who had fled into the forests told of mounted riders who seemed to appear from nowhere, ghosts of the night that struck with precision and vanished as quickly as they came. In the ruined camp, commanders tried to organize what remained, but order was impossible where chaos had already consumed hope. Letters would later describe Khmelnyk as a massacre, a slaughter unmatched, but even those words fell short of reality. The horror was too vast, too sudden, too complete. Across the hills, riders scouted and reconnoitered, sending signals back to Batu Khan, who maintained a calm presence amid the carnage, his mind already moving toward the next target, the next city, the next barrier. He understood that victory at Khmelnyk was not measured in bodies alone. It was measured in fear, in the cracking of the human spirit, in the knowledge that nothing in Europe had yet learned to fight this method, this relentless system of war. By the next morning, the Mongols had pulled back slightly, leaving the field largely empty, a grotesque tableau of fallen men and shattered dreams. Survivors stumbled toward the forests and villages, carrying the stories that would grow into legend, or, in some cases, vanish entirely into obscurity, leaving only the scars upon the land. The knights, the Rus warriors, and the Hungarian detachments who had faced the impossible now moved as shadows themselves, bodies broken, minds haunted, knowing that the path to the heart of Europe was open. In the weeks leading up to the battle, European commanders had been divided, unable to agree on strategy, burdened by pride and a fatal underestimation of the Mongol threat. Letters from courts, from bishops and kings, reveal an almost childish disbelief. Armies of the steppe were considered raiders, barbarians, a nuisance that could be defeated by valor and massed men. They could not imagine an enemy who moved with the precision of a machine, who struck in coordinated waves, who understood terrain, timing, and psychology better than any European strategist could dream. The Mongols had studied these lands, learned the strengths and weaknesses of the scattered principalities, and exploited every gap, every hesitation. They attacked not with brute force alone, but with cunning, feigned retreats, ambushes from hidden flanks, and a mastery of speed and surprise that left European commanders scrambling. At Khmelnyk, these tactics were perfected. The knight's charge into the corridor of death was not an accident. It was the trap's first motion. When Sube'etei signaled the wings to close, the defenders realized, too late, that they had been funneled into a cage by an enemy who treated war as geometry, not honor. The encirclement was complete within minutes, a swirling vortex of horse, bow, and blade. Men fell by the dozens, the remaining few trapped in confusion, unable to escape or fight effectively. Every shout for courage was met by silence or death. The surviving units broke and fled toward the forests, but even there, Mongol horsemen pursued with disciplined patience, cutting off stragglers and leaving the field entirely in their control. By the time night fell, Khmelnyk had become a ghost of civilization, a warning written across Podolian plains in blood, mud, and shattered metal. The psychological impact of Khmelnyk on the surrounding regions was immediate and profound. Cities that had heard of the Mongol advance now feared for their very existence. Merchants fled, villages emptied, and the nobility scrambled to raise whatever forces they could muster. Tales of the Mongol method, discipline, speed, tactical brilliance, and unrelenting brutality spread faster than the army itself, creating fear that paralyzed even those who were yet untouched. Khmelnyk became the name whispered in terror, a symbol that no fortress, no knightly valor, no alliances of the region could guarantee safety. Traders along the rivers avoided certain roads, farmers abandoned their fields, and a pervasive sense of doom crept into everyday life. The Mongols had not only won a battlefield, they had shattered the confidence of entire principalities, leaving a vacuum of power and morale that would shape the coming months. In this way, the battle was more than a military victory. It was a psychological weapon, a prelude to the sweeping campaigns that would carry the Mongol storm through Hungary, Poland, and beyond. From Khmelnyk, the map of Europe was no longer just lines and cities. It became a land under threat, a continent that had glimpsed the unstoppable and shivered. Batu Khan's command at Khmelnyk exemplified the Mongols' strategic brilliance. Unlike European leaders, who often relied on valor, brute force, or religious sanction, he understood the importance of speed, reconnaissance, and flexibility. His cavalry moved in coordination, each wing aware of the other's positions, closing gaps, exploiting weaknesses, and maintaining an unbroken chain of pressure against the defenders. Sube'etei, whose reputation as a strategist had already spread across the steppes, managed the battlefield like a chessboard predicting European responses, using feigned retreats to draw men into traps and ensuring that the momentum of the Mongol advance remained unstoppable. Khmelnyk was not merely a battle. It was a demonstration of a system of war that Europe had no frame of reference for. The soldiers who survived, the scattered knights, and the fleeing peasants carried tales that could not be fully comprehended by those who had not seen it themselves. An army that moved faster than rumor, struck with precision, and vanished as if it had never been there at all. Amid the carnage, human stories emerged, small, tragic, and heroic in equal measure. A Rus soldier, broken and blooded, lifted a fallen comrade's shield to protect a group of villagers fleeing the battlefield, giving his life to create a few moments of escape. A Hungarian knight, separated from his retinue, held a narrow bridge against a squad of Mongol riders long enough for families to reach the opposite bank. Young boys and inexperienced fighters bore flags and symbols of fallen units, their fear and determination etched into every step. Yet, despite these acts, the overwhelming force of the Mongols could not be resisted. Every personal victory was temporary. Every moment of courage merely delayed the inevitable. By the time darkness fully settled over the plains, Khmelnyk had become more than a battlefield. It was a proving ground, a warning, a silent testament to the scale of destruction the Mongols were capable of, and the fragility of European resistance in the face of a war machine unlike any the world had ever known. The morning after the Battle of Khmelnyk, the plains were silent in a way that pressed on the lungs. Smoke drifted lazily from small fires, casting long shadows over frozen ground littered with the remnants of men, horses, and shattered equipment. Survivors stumbled through the mud, eyes hollow, haunted by the echoes of arrows and the screams of comrades. The European forces, once a patchwork of knights, Rus warriors, and Hungarian detachments, were scattered and disorganized. Many had fled into the forests, some hidden among reeds near frozen rivers, too afraid to move yet too terrified to rest. Word spread rapidly. Khmelnyk had fallen. Europe had witnessed, at last, the methodical efficiency of the Mongol war machine, and the consequences of underestimating it. It was no longer a rumor. It was undeniable. The Mongols could not be bargained with, preyed to, or outmaneuvered by conventional force. They were a force of nature, and Europe, as it had always known itself, was suddenly fragile and exposed. Batu Khan, ever calculating, did not linger at Khmelnyk longer than necessary. His army needed to keep moving. The principle of speed and momentum, which had served them across the steppes, applied even here, deep in foreign territory. He ordered scouting parties to continue their reconnaissance, mapping river crossings, valleys, and roadways, ensuring that the army's advance would remain fluid and that no hidden pockets of resistance could regroup undetected. Sube'etei oversaw the logistics. Supply lines for horse, bow, and rider had to be maintained despite the foreign terrain, the frozen rivers, and the chaotic remnants of fleeing peasants and soldiers. The Mongols understood that fear itself could be a weapon, and they deployed detachments to carry word of their approach to towns and villages ahead. Messengers told of Khmelnyk, of bodies left untouched by mercy, of arrows that found any gap in armor, of entire units vanishing in minutes. These reports were often exaggerated in the retelling, and yet even the exaggerations served their purpose. Europe, previously confident in its fortified cities and knightly valor, now trembled. As Batu's forces advanced toward the borderlands of Hungary, political consequences began to ripple through the region. Kings and princes convened emergency councils, sending envoys to the Pope, seeking aid and counsel, but the news from Khmelnyk undermined any sense of security. Local lords, who had often squabbled among themselves over borders, wealth, and loyalty, found themselves in an unprecedented position, their internal disputes now irrelevant against an enemy who did not negotiate. The psychological impact was profound. Entire communities fled preemptively, abandoning villages, fields, and strongholds. Merchants hid their goods, fearing that armies they had never seen could appear at any moment. Priests and monks interpreted the Mongol advance as divine punishment, preaching fear and submission. The Mongol method, precision, speed, encirclement, became legend even before the next battle, reinforcing the terror that had been sown at Khmelnyk. Fear, it seemed, traveled faster than steel. Meanwhile, the Mongol army moved like a living organism, its pace relentless. Sube'etei divided forces with careful precision, leaving smaller detachments to pursue fleeing soldiers and secure supply routes, while the main body pressed westward. Each step was calculated to maintain the initiative, to ensure that European forces could not regroup, and to exploit any sign of disarray. The survivors of Khmelnyk carried the memory of failure and told stories to those they encountered along the roads. Entire villages surrendered without a fight when the name Batu Khan was whispered at their gates. Armies that attempted to intercept the Mongols found themselves outmaneuvered, their formations broken by a combination of superior mobility and psychological warfare. At every crossroads, the Mongols demonstrated an understanding of terrain and timing that European commanders could not comprehend. Rivers, forests, and hills became not obstacles, but instruments in a symphony of calculated destruction. The westward march of the steppe was unstoppable, and Khmelnyk had been only the opening movement. Back in the land surrounding Podolia, the surviving knights and Rus warriors struggled to reorganize, but morale was shattered. The sight of the battlefield, the bodies of comrades, and the efficiency of the Mongol attack left many questioning the purpose of resistance. Some fled to fortified cities, hoping walls and gates could withstand what Khmelnyk had demonstrated, while others sought refuge in monasteries or villages deep in forests. A few noblemen attempted to rally scattered units, but coordination proved impossible. Every messenger who returned carried reports of the Mongols' cunning, speed, and cruelty. The psychological warfare was as lethal as the arrows and sabers. Fear undermined cohesion, hesitation became defeat, and retreat became survival. Europe's soldiers realized that battlefield courage alone could not counter an enemy that mastered both mind and machine, that understood the art of war as deeply as the science of it. The Mongols' movement toward Hungary after Khmelnyk was not just military but strategic, aiming to exploit the vacuum created by shattered European resistance. Cities were abandoned before their gates were reached. Supply lines of defenders crumbled under panic. Entire provinces were left empty, and peasants fled into forests and mountains, leaving only the landscape as a map of fear. Reports of Khmelnyk spread faster than any army could march, creating an invisible front of terror that slowed, scattered, and weakened European opposition before physical confrontation even occurred. Batu and Sabadell understood that the mind could be conquered as efficiently as the body. Every letter carried, every whisper, every sighting of Mongol riders on the horizon reinforced the inevitability of their campaign. Amid this relentless advance, Europe began to grasp a terrifying truth. The Mongols did not fight like men of their world. Their warfare ignored pride, chivalry, and the codes of honor that had guided European armies for centuries. Victory was measured in the complete annihilation of opposition, the control of movement, and the orchestration of fear. Khmelnyk had provided a template. It demonstrated that speed, flexibility, and psychological domination could overcome larger or better armored forces. European leaders who had believed in fortifications, alliances, or sheer numbers were forced to reconsider, often too late. The Mongol war machine could adapt to anything, predict reactions, and exploit hesitation in ways the old continent had never seen. The aftermath of Khmelnyk would shape not only the next battles but the perception of warfare in Europe for decades to come. As the survivors of Khmelnyk disappeared into forests and cities, the Mongols pressed on. Batu's eye remained on the broader goal, the conquest of Hungary and the opening of the path deeper into Central Europe. Every village they passed, every river crossing, every minor encounter reinforced the efficiency of their system. Sabadell, ever vigilant, noted the formation of new defensive lines, the potential assembly of European forces, and planned his movements with precision that seemed almost supernatural. By the time the Mongol advance reached the peripheries of Hungarian lands, the echoes of Khmelnyk had already preceded them, weakening morale and creating the illusion of an unstoppable force. Europe, in its fragmented political and military state, was unprepared for the scope, speed, and intelligence of the Mongol campaign. Khmelnyk, though forgotten by history, had set the stage for an era in which fear itself became a weapon, and the steppe storm, once unleashed, could not be turned back.